Students, in this war, I'm going to talk about the causes of the War of 1812. And really, it stems from the ongoing war between Napoleon and the British, in which the United States is trying to remain neutral because it's a young country, it's just starting out. And this neutrality is increasingly difficult to maintain because both Britain and France are trying to bully the United States into becoming their own tool or their proxy. And so they try to prevent the United States from trading with their enemy by boarding boarding American merchant ships that are carrying food supplies or goods to the enemy nation. So the British board American ships that are headed for France, and French board American ships that are headed for Britain. And American goods are being seized, American sailors are being forced into the service of the British Navy, and the Americans are protesting, but the British don't seem to be listening, and the French don't seem to be listening to them. And again, this is part of America trying to assert and establish itself as a nation on an equal footing with these other major Atlantic powers. And this really comes to a head when a British ship called the Legend fires on an American ship called the Chesapeake to force it to come to so that the British can board it. They board it with force. They seize several sailors. One of them they accuse of being a deserter from the British Navy, and they hang him. And so this is seen as a huge violation of American freedom, of American independence that the Americans have fought for. And so there's a great amount of pressure on Jefferson to go to war. Jefferson knows that the United States isn't ready to fight a war, and so he resists going to war as long as possible to try and give the United States more time to prepare. But his first response, he has to respond in some way, and so he responds with the Embargo Act. The Embargo Act is designed to end all American exports out of Britain and France. Jefferson says, you won't respect our independent right to trade with both Britain and France. We're not going to trade with either of you. And actually, this is a disastrous strategy for the Americans that hurts them more than it hurts Britain and France, who go around trading with other people. Whereas for Americans, exports crash, tariff revenues crash, shipbuilding sees a huge loss, crop prices decline, and American farmers and merchants are really suffering. And Jefferson, towards the end of his time as president, is increasingly unpopular. Nevertheless, the Republicans still win the election of 1808, but the new president is James Madison. And Madison, in contrast to Jefferson, is willing to go to war. Jefferson might have done anyway at this point because his Embargo Act had become so unpopular. So this is the first time that Congress votes to go to war. It's also the closest war vote because the Federalists in New England don't want to go to war. Typically in American history, by the time the United States goes to war, everyone's in support of the war. So this is one of the unusual times, perhaps because it's so early in American history, where this is still being where there's some kind of division about that, where that practice hasn't become established. And so the Federalists are opposed to going to war because they depend on England for trade. And basically they say, we're willing to risk our ships being seized if we have a chance of some of them going through, and we have a chance of continuing to trade with Britain. But that's rejected. That view doesn't win the day. And instead, it means that Britain and the United States are going to go to war. And so part of the reason why the United States is going to war is to defend its national honor. This is the whole idea of the new nation, to defend the fact that they are an independent nation, that Britain can't just seize their ships without consequence. And this party is led by a group of politicians, a group of Republican politicians that are known as the War Hawks, come from the South, who are led by Henry Clay from Kentucky, John Calhoun of South Carolina. Remember these names because they're going to come back again and they're going to be quite important. So this is one reason, national honor, one of the causes of the war. Another is a long-standing American goal to seize Canada, make Canada the 14th colony, the next state. It would secure their northern border. There is a sense on the part of the Americans that the Canadians want to be free of Britain, just in the same way that they had wanted to be free, that this will be kind of an easy takeover because the Canadians will rise up and support them. The other cause of the war is to halt Indian attacks into the United States that were often funded and promoted and supported and encouraged by the British as a way of attacking the United States. And these attacks were coming out of the south, were coming out of Spanish-held Florida, and were also coming out of the north into the Ohio River Valley. And recently, the Native Americans had acquired a leader named Tecumseh, who have been successful in uniting all the Indian tribes by appealing to the racial differences that distinguish Native Americans from European settlers. Racial differences and different ways of life. And so he appealed to them to reject Western practices and to unite against American expansion. And this is seen as quite dangerous, even though in the end, Tecumseh is defeated at the Battle of Tippecanoe in 1811 by the governor of the Indiana Territory, William Henry Harrison. And this means that this threat is pushed back for a while, but that's still something that the Americans are worried about. They're still worried about the threat of Indian attacks promoted by the British, and that's another reason why they go to war in 1812.